Ruth Vessey read the ticker tape faster than any man on the floor of Halloran Vane, so they paid her to type the men's numbers, and they told her not to speak. She sat at the last desk in the typing pool. She read the tape under her breath, the way a woman reads a hymn she has known since childhood. And that morning she called the turn a full hour before it came. She said it soft, to no one. The broker beside her, a man named Dabney, heard it. He said nothing then. But an hour later he stood up and said it loud, as his own. He took the bonus for it. Ruth did not correct him. She only folded the strip of tape into her glove and kept typing. Then Sterling Vane came through the pool. Senior partner, silver at the temples. He looked at 40 women bent over 40 machines, and he said it plain, so all of them could hear. The girls type. They don't read. He said it the very minute after Ruth had, in silence, marked the worst trade of his year. And there was one man who saw. Peter Halloran, the owner's son, home 2 years from New York. He stopped at her desk. Because he had watched her lips move a full minute before the tape confirmed the number, he could not look away. He opened his mouth to speak. If you have ever been judged by your dress instead of your heart, this story is for you. Before we go on, take 1 second and subscribe, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Now, let's go back to the beginning. It was autumn in Ashford, Ohio, in the year 1961. The maples along Fountain Street had gone to rust and gold. The mornings came in cold off the river now. Ruth Vessey walked to work in a gray wool coat that had been her mother's, and she walked fast, because $41 a week did not buy a second coat. Halloran Vane sat on the corner of Main and Bell. 4 stories of pale limestone. Brass doors that caught the early sun. Ruth did not go in through the brass doors. Those were for the partners and the clients and the men who bought and sold. She went around the side, to the plain door by the alley, and up the back stairs to the 3rd floor. That was where the typing pool was. That was where the women were kept. She hung her coat on the hook that was hers. She uncovered her machine. And before she did one thing else, before she typed a single slip, she went to the corner of the room where the ticker machine stood under its glass dome. It clattered there all day. A little brass thing on a spindle, spitting out a thin white ribbon of paper, printing the price of the whole world 1 letter at a time. Most of the women hated the sound of it. To Ruth it was the sweetest sound in the building. It was the sound of the market talking, and she was one of the few people alive who could hear what it said. She had learned the tape at her father's knee, before all of it, before the world closed over him. When she was a girl, he would sit her on his lap in the evenings and run the tape through his fingers, and he would say, "Watch, Ruthie, watch how it breathes." He taught her that the tape had a rhythm the way a man had a pulse. He taught her that price was only the surface of it. Underneath the price was fear, and underneath the fear was truth, and the tape told the truth to anyone patient enough to read it honestly. Her father had been a broker once. A good one, but that was a long time ago, and in another town, and under a name that meant nothing in this building anymore. She had made sure of that. Her last name meant nothing here. Nobody at Halloran Vane knew whose daughter she was. And she intended to keep it that way, because the not knowing was the only thing that kept her safe. A woman with no name could not be ruined twice. So she read the tape in secret, the way some people pray in secret. Every morning she let the first strip run out uncut. She never tore it. She never fed a fresh spool over the top of it. She let the morning's first reading lie there on the little brass table, whole, the way you leave a thing you love undisturbed. She did it out of habit. She did it because her father had always done it. He said, "You never cut the first tape of the day. You let it finish its sentence." It was a small thing. Nobody noticed. It cost nothing. And it was the only tenderness in the whole gray room. The pool ran on order slips. All day the runners came up from the trading floor below with the brokers' scrawled trades, and the women turned that scrawl into clean typed confirmations. Buy 400. Sell short 2,000. Margin ledger for the Ashworth account. Ruth typed faster than anyone. Her fingers knew the keys the way her eyes knew the tape. She could type a man's order and, at the same time, in the corner of her mind, know that the order was a mistake. She knew when a broker was buying a thing that was already dying. She could see it in the tape from across the room. But she was not paid to see. She was paid to type. And so she typed. That was the shape of Ruth Vessey's life. She was the fastest reader in the building, and she was the only person in it forbidden to have an opinion. The offenses were small at first, small the way a stone in a shoe is small. There was Dabney. Harold Dabney sat at a broker's desk, one floor down, but he came up to the pool 3 or 4 times a day, leaning over the rail by Ruth's machine, watching the tape with a frown, because he did not really understand it. He was not a stupid man, he was just an ordinary one, and the tape does not give up its truth to ordinary men. So he would stand there, and Ruth would murmur to herself, and Dabney would listen without seeming to. The morning it happened for real, Ruth watched Consolidated Rail start to roll. It had been climbing for 2 weeks. Every man on the floor loved it. But that morning the tape changed its breathing. The prints came smaller, the rallies came shorter, and Ruth knew, the way you know a fever has broken, that it had topped. She said it under her breath. It's turning. It topped at the open. Dabney heard. He wandered off. And an hour later, when Consolidated Rail had begun in earnest to fall, he stood at the top of the stairs and announced to the floor that he had called the top, that he'd felt it turning at the open, and the senior men clapped him on the back, and Vane himself signed off a small bonus for the good read. Ruth heard the whole thing from her desk. She did not stand. She did not say a word. She took the little strip of tape where she had marked the turn. And she folded it once, and she folded it again, and she slid it into the seam of her glove. She kept a small collection of them in there by now, little folded truths that no one would ever read but her. Then she went back to typing, and her face never changed, because a woman who cannot afford a second coat cannot afford a temper. But someone had seen. Peter Halloran had come up the front stairs that morning, and he had been standing by the frosted door of the partners' hall. And he had watched Ruth's lips move. He had heard the murmur. It's turning. It topped at the open. He had checked his watch. And then, 1 hour later, he had heard Harold Dabney say the same thing, word for word, in a louder voice, and take money for it. Peter Halloran was 31 years old. He had spent 2 years in New York, at one of the big houses, where the tape ran hot and the men were quick, and the world was already changing faster than Ashford would ever admit. He had come home because his father was old, and the firm was his to inherit, and because he wanted, more than he could say, to prove himself something other than his father's son. He had a good eye. Good enough to know he was not looking at a good eye now. He was looking at a great one. And it belonged to a woman at the last desk in the typing pool, in a coat that had been her mother's. He did not say anything that day. He was not sure what a man was supposed to say. But the next morning, before the floor opened, before Ruth even arrived, Peter Halloran went up to the 3rd floor, while it was still empty. He went to the ticker machine in the corner. He watched it run out its first white ribbon of the day. And he did not cut it. He lifted the whole strip, careful, the way you'd lift a sleeping child, and he carried it to the last desk in the pool. And he laid it there, uncut, whole, finished its sentence, on Ruth's desk. Then he left before anyone came. When Ruth got in that morning and hung up the gray coat and came to her machine, she found the morning tape lying across her keys. Uncut, she stood very still. She looked around the empty pool. She thought at first it was an accident, a careless runner, a machine that had spat too far. But the tape was not fallen. It was placed. It lay straight and deliberate, the way she herself laid it every morning on the brass table. And she understood, all at once, exactly what it meant. Someone had watched her do the small tender thing she did each day for no one. Someone had seen it. And someone had done it back to her, on purpose, as a message she was never meant to be able to prove. She hated that she understood it. And she hated, worse, that she was glad. She stood there in the cold morning light with her heart going faster than it had any right to, holding a strip of paper that said nothing but numbers, and she felt seen for the first time in 12 years. It frightened her more than Vane ever had. She folded that one too, but she did not put it in her glove. She put it in the small drawer where she kept nothing else. And she went to work. Down on the floor below, a bigger thing was taking shape, and Ruth could read the shape of it in the slips that came up to her machine. Sterling Vane had fallen in love with a company. Amberline Electronics. A young outfit, making the little parts that went into radios, and soon, the makers said, into televisions and machines no one had names for yet. Vane believed in it the way some men believe in a horse. And he was not just buying it for the firm, he was buying it for the clients. For the Ashford accounts, the doctor, the 2 church funds, the widow Pearson, the men who owned the hardware store and the lumber yard and the little bottling plant by the river. And he was buying it on margin. Borrowed money. Ruth typed the slips. She watched the number grow through October. 400,000. Then $1 million. By the end of the month, the firm held over $2 million of Amberline for its Ashford clients, and most of that was borrowed against the value of the stock itself. $2,400,000. 31 families from Ashford margined into a single young company that made a part the size of a thumbnail. Ruth typed every slip of it, and every slip made the cold spot in her chest grow a little wider. Because she read the Amberline tape too. And the Amberline tape was starting to breathe wrong. The morning it all came to a head, it was raining. Peter Halloran came up to the pool in the middle of the day, which the owner's son did not do, and he came straight to Ruth's desk, which was worse. Every machine in the room went quiet by half. 40 women did not look up and did not miss a thing. There was a dispute on the floor, he said. About Amberline. About which way it was moving right now, this minute. 2 of the senior men said one thing. The tape was confused, or the men were. And Peter Halloran, in front of the whole pool, asked Ruth Vessey if she would come downstairs and read it. Ruth's hands went still on the keys. She knew what this was. She knew what it would cost. A typist did not go down to the floor. The floor was brass and mahogany and men. The pool was gray metal and women. There was a whole ocean between the two, and it was not made of stairs. To cross it was to be seen. And to be seen was the one thing Ruth Vessey had spent 12 years learning not to be. But she thought of 31 families. And she stood. She walked down the front stairs beside Peter Halloran. She walked through the frosted doors she had never once been let through. And she stepped out onto the trading floor of Halloran and Vane, and 40 men stopped what they were doing and stared, because a woman from the pool was standing among them in a coat that had been her mother's. The ticker sat on its stand in the center of the floor, spooling out its ribbon into a brass basket. The senior men stood around it. Sterling Vane stood tallest of them, and when he saw her his face went from surprise to something colder. Peter said, "Read it, Miss Vessey. Tell us where Amberline is." The room was so quiet Ruth could hear the machine breathing. She stepped up to the tape. She did not touch it. She never needed to touch it. She let it run through the air an inch above her fingers, and she read the last several minutes of it, the way you'd read the last several lines of a letter that carried bad news. Then she said it. Clear, not loud, but clear enough for 40 men. It's rolling over. It topped about an hour ago. The rallies are getting shorter and the cells are getting bigger, and there's a big seller working underneath who doesn't want to be seen. Amberline is going down. You are all still buying the top of it. She said it to the tape. But everyone knew who she was really correcting. Because Sterling Vane had spent all morning telling the floor that Amberline was strong, that the dip was a gift, that they should buy more. And a typist had just stood in the middle of his floor and told him, to his face, in front of every man he commanded, that he was wrong. For one long second, nobody moved. Then, Sterling Vane laughed. It was not a warm laugh. He turned to the men around him, and he spread his hands as if to say, "You see what we have come to." And then he looked at Ruth, and he said the words that would follow her out the door. "Go back to your keys, Miss Vessey. The girls type. They don't read." Some of the men laughed with him, because that is what men do on a floor when the senior man laughs. Ruth felt the heat come up her neck. She did not let it reach her face. She looked at Sterling Vane for one moment longer, and then she looked at the tape one last time, and then she turned and she walked off the floor with her back straight and her chin level, and she did not hurry, and she did not stumble, and she did not give them one single thing to remember except how a woman walks when she has been made small in public and refuses to fold. Peter Halloran stood by the ticker and did not follow her. He could not. He knew that if he went after her now, in front of all of them, he would only make her the story, and the story would eat her alive. So he let her go. And it was the first time in his life that his name, the name that opened every door in this building, could do nothing for the one person he wanted to help. He hated it, but he let her go. And that was his first failure, and he knew it while it was happening, which is the worst way to fail. Ruth went back up to the pool. She sat down at the last desk. She uncovered her machine, which she had never covered, and she began to type, and her hands did not shake, because she would not let them. Word travels fast in a building made of men and grudges. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, old Cornelius Halloran knew that his son had walked a girl from the typing pool onto the trading floor. Cornelius Halloran was 63 years old, and he had built the firm from a single desk, and he believed in the order of the world the way other men believe in God. He believed that a man's blood decided his place. He believed that the floor was for the men who owned the money and the pool was for the women who typed about it, and that this arrangement was not cruelty, but nature, and that fighting it was like fighting the weather. He called Peter into the frosted glass office that evening, the corner office, the one with the owner's name on the door, and he did not raise his voice. Because men like Cornelius Halloran never had to. "You will not," he said, "parade a girl from the pool across my floor. I do not care how clever you think she is. Cleverness in a woman is a parlor trick, Peter. It is not a foundation for anything. This firm is 100 years of good names doing business with good names. That is the whole of it. That is the only thing it is. A typist who reads a tape is a curiosity. Nothing more. Do you understand me? You have a future in this room. That girl does not, and if you tie yourself to her, you will not either." And then Cornelius said the thing that showed the real fear under it. "She has no name, Peter. Do you understand what that means? A woman with no name has nothing to lose. And a person with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in a business built on trust. Keep her at her keys. Or let her go. But keep her out of my sight." Peter said, "Yes, sir, because you say yes, sir," to Cornelius Halloran. But something in him had already decided the opposite, quietly, in the place where a man keeps the decisions he isn't ready to say out loud. That same week his father presented him with the future, and the future had a name, and the name was Cordelia Ashwood. There was a dinner. There was always a dinner. Cordelia was 26, a banker's daughter from Columbus, poised and lovely and entirely certain of her own right to everything she had been raised to expect. She was not cruel. That was the thing about her. She was simply sure. She had been told her whole life that she would marry a man like Peter Halloran and run a house like his mother's, and she saw no reason to doubt any of it, and so she sat at the long table in the candlelight and spoke of the right things, and smiled at the right moments, and everyone at the table understood that the matter was settled. Everyone except Peter, who sat at the head of a dinner given in his honor and did not eat. Ruth would not have known any of this, except that Ashford is a small town, and a typing pool hears everything, and the women whispered about the Ashwood girl and the Halloran boy over their lunch pails. Ruth listened and typed, and said nothing. It was nothing to her. She told herself that firmly. It was nothing to her at all. But something had begun, and neither of them could stop it now, and it showed itself in small things. Centimeters, that is the only way to describe them. The distance between two people closing one small measure at a time, in ways so quiet that neither could ever be accused of anything. She noticed that he never ate at his own dinners. She saw him at the far end of the floor at noon, the plate untouched, and she understood something about a man who is fed by everyone and hungry all the same. He learned that she took her coffee black. There was a girl who came round with the coffee cart at 10, and one morning Peter was passing, and he heard Ruth wave the sugar away, and he filed it somewhere. The way he filed a number he might need. 2 mornings later he was near the cart again, and he said to the coffee girl, "No sugar for Miss Vessey," and Ruth looked up sharp, because a thing like that, remembered, is louder than a shout. And the ticker machine. The little brass one in the corner that Ruth loved. It had been ailing for a month. The type wheel stuck. It printed the letters faint and doubled, and twice it jammed so bad the whole spindle had to be freed by hand, and the men said it was old and ought to be replaced, and nobody fixed it, because nobody but Ruth really used it up in the pool. Then one morning Ruth came in and the machine ran clean. The letters printed sharp and black. The spindle turned smooth. Someone had taken it apart in the night and cleaned every part of it, and oiled it, and set it running true, and left it running, so that it would be warm and clean and ready when she came in. She knew whose hands had done it. Nobody else in that building would have known how, and nobody else would have cared to, and nobody else would have done it in the dark, where no one could thank him for it. She stood in front of the clean machine for a long time that morning. She did not fold anything into her glove. She just stood and listened to it breathe right for the first time in a month, and felt the centimeters close another notch, and was afraid. It was Walter who said the thing out loud. Walter Pym was a junior clerk, 30 years old, honest as a plain loaf of bread. And he had loved Ruth Vessey quietly for 2 years, and never once made her carry the weight of it. He caught her by the back stairs one evening. He turned his hat in his hands, and he said what a decent man says when he sees a decent woman walking toward a cliff. "Ruth, I'll say it once and never again. Whatever this is with young Mr. Halloran, it won't cost him a thing. Do you understand me? Men like that, it costs them nothing. It falls all on you. His name protects him. You don't have a name at all. When it goes wrong, and these things go wrong, he'll be a partner and you'll be a woman who was sent away, and no other firm in this state will take you after. I'm not telling you what to feel. I'd never. I'm just telling you the arithmetic. Somebody ought to, and it might as well be somebody who'd never use it against you." And then he put his hat back on and went down the stairs, and he never spoke of it again, and that was the kind of man Walter Pym was. Ruth stood in the stairwell and knew that every word he'd said was true. The arithmetic was exactly as he'd counted it. She was the one with everything to lose and nothing to protect her, and the wise thing, the safe thing, the only sensible thing was to keep her head down and her eyes on her keys and let the market do what markets do. But then she thought of the slips. $2,400,000. 31 families. the widow Pearson, who had brought in her whole husband's insurance because Sterling Vane had told her Amberline was safe as houses. And she thought of her father, and the year the tape breathed wrong, and every man on his floor kept buying while he watched the truth of it and could not stop them. She had watched what it did to a good man to know the truth and be forbidden to act on it. She would not be the reason those 31 families were ruined, whatever it cost her. She had spent 12 years keeping herself safe by staying invisible, and she was beginning to understand that there were some things not worth the price of your own invisibility. Something in her turned, the way the tape turns. She could feel it. She could not have called the top of her own life. But it had topped, all the same, and she was rolling over into something she could not take back. The order came down on a Thursday. Sterling Vane, over the objection of the 2 younger men, issued a standing order to the whole floor. Hold Amberline. Hold every share. Do not sell 1 lot for any client until the margin clock ran out, 3 trading days out. He was betting the whole position that Amberline would rally back before the borrowed money came due. He was betting 31 families that he was right and the tape was wrong. And the tape was breaking. Ruth read it Friday morning. She stood in front of the clean little machine that Peter had fixed with his own hands, and she watched the Amberline ribbon run out, and there was no confusion in it now, none at all. The big cellar underneath had stopped hiding. The prints were coming in a flood. It was not rolling over anymore. It was falling, and it was going to fall through the margin price, and when it did, every one of those 31 families would get the call that took the house and the insurance and the church fund with it, and there would be no rally, because the tape does not lie, and the tape was screaming. She held Sterling Vane's standing order in her left hand. Hold Amberline. Do not sell. She held the morning tape in her right. A typist does not countermand a senior partner. There is no world in 1961 in which that is a survivable thing to do. It would be the end of her at Halloran Vane, and Walter's arithmetic said it would be the end of her at every firm after. She knew all of that. She stood there, and she knew it completely. And then Ruth Vessey did the thing she could never take back. She sat down at her machine, and she did not type an order slip. She typed the truth. She typed the read of the tape, clean and exact, the top and the turn and the seller underneath, and the price it would break through and when. She addressed it to Peter Halloran. And then she typed a second copy, and she addressed that one to the firm's largest client's private line, the man whose money moved the others, and she walked it down herself to the wire desk, and she sent it, over the standing order of Sterling Vane, in her own words, from her own reading. For the first time in 12 years, a Vessey had put her name on a market call, not the name on the paper, the name underneath it. Her father's daughter had read the floor and told the truth to whoever would listen, exactly as he had taught her. Exactly as the firm that broke him had forbidden. And it was done now. It was on the wire. It was gone. She stood at the wire desk with her cold hands empty and her heart going like the tape in a break. And she understood that whatever happened next, the woman who had walked in that morning invisible and safe was never coming back. She had made herself seen. She had signed it. And somewhere below her, in the frosted rooms she had never been let into, a senior partner was about to learn that his order had been overruled by a girl from the pool. The margin clock had 3 days to run, and the tape was already screaming. The morning after, nothing looked different. That was the strange part. The clerks came in at the same hour. The radiators knocked the same way. The ticker in the corner started its chatter at 9:30 like it always did, and 40 men bent over their slips and their phones, and Ruth Vessey sat at her machine and typed the men's numbers, exactly as she had for 12 years. From the outside she was the same woman. Head down, hands moving. Invisible, but she was not the same woman. She had signed her name to the truth, and it was out there now, running down a wire she could not reach anymore. She waited for the sky to fall. It did not fall that day. What she did not know, could not know from her seat by the wall, was that Peter Halloran had read her wire at 7 that morning before the floor opened. He had read it twice. Then he had folded it into his breast pocket and gone down to the client rooms early, and he had started, quietly, one account at a time, to do the thing she had told him to do. He did not announce it. He did not stand on a desk. He simply walked from office to office with the calm of a man born to walk anywhere, and he told the clients who would listen that Amberline had topped, that the position would not hold, that they should let him unwind it while there was still a floor under the price. Some of them listened because he was a Halloran. Some of them listened because they had been nervous for weeks and only needed a young man in a good suit to say the word out loud. He never once said where the reed came from. He was protecting her. And he was, without knowing it, walking straight into the thing that would break everything open. Because Sterling Vane noticed. Vane noticed the way a cat notices a sound in the wall. Money was moving that he had ordered held. Accounts he had margined into Amberline himself were being quietly walked back out, and he could not find the order that authorized it. He went through the wire slips. He went through them twice, and on the third pass he found a message that had gone out over his own standing order, addressed to Peter Halloran and to the firm's largest client, and it was not in his hand, and not in Dabney's hand, and not in any broker's hand. It was typed. Clean, perfect, the way only one person in the building typed. Vane held that slip up to the window light for a long time, and something in his face went very still and very cold. He did not come to Ruth. Not yet. That was the worst of it, the waiting. He was a man who liked to build a thing before he swung it, and he spent the next day building. Ruth felt it the way you feel weather coming. She could not have said how she knew. But she knew. On the second afternoon of the 3, she carried a stack of finished slips down the back hall to the wire desk, and the freight elevator was standing open, and Peter Halloran was in it. He was alone. He had his coat over his arm and his hat in his hand, and he looked, for the first time since she had known him, tired. Not the tired of a long day. The tired of a man carrying something heavy in the dark. She stepped in because there was no reason not to. The gate came down. The car dropped, slow, groaning on its cable, and for a few feet they stood in the metal box, with the whole building humming around them and no one else in the world. "They're moving out," he said quietly. He was watching the floor numbers. 11 accounts so far. 12 after this morning. The ones who trusted me. And the ones who didn't? Vane still has them held. He turned and looked at her. "He's held 31 families to the clock, Ruth. If it breaks the way your tape says, they lose everything." The widow Pearson put her husband's whole insurance in on his word. She knew about the widow Pearson. She had typed that slip herself, months ago, and hated it going out. "It's going to break," she said. "It topped an hour before I sent the wire. It hasn't stopped topping since." "I know." He said it simply. He believed her the way he believed the floor under his feet. Without argument, and that was a thing no man had ever done for her in her whole life. Her father had believed her. And then her father was gone, and after him no one, for 12 years. And now this. The car groaned. Her hands were cold. They were always cold in that building. The radiators never reached the back halls, and she had a strip of the morning tape wound around her fingers out of the old habit, the way another woman might worry a rosary. Peter looked down at her hands, and then he did something she would remember on her worst nights and her best ones for the rest of her life. He reached out, and he covered her cold hands with his own. The tape ribbon caught warm between their palms, and he did not say anything at all. She should have pulled away. Walter's arithmetic said so. The whole shape of her life said so. A typist and the owner's son, in a freight elevator, her ruined name a secret and his name on the building. There was no version of that story that ended anywhere but in her ruin, and none of his. She did not pull away. "Peter," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. She heard herself do it, and she could not take it back. And she did not want to. The centimeters that had been closing for weeks, the ones nobody had named, closed almost to nothing in that dropping car. Almost the gate hit the bottom. The floor bell rang. And the world came back. He let go of her hands. He had to. She stepped out first, the way she had to. And as she came around the corner into the light of the main hall, she saw Walter Pyme standing at the wire desk with a slip in his hand. And she knew from the set of his shoulders that he had seen the elevator and seen who was in it, and understood the whole of it in one look. Walter did not say anything. He was a decent man. He set his slip down. He gave her the smallest nod, the kind you give someone you are letting go of, and he stepped back to let her pass. There was no anger in it, only a quiet and a sadness, and something like grace. He had loved her honestly, and he had lost, and he took the loss the way honest men do, without making her pay for it. She almost wished he had been angry. Anger she could have argued with, that gentle stepping back she could not. The blow came the next morning, the last morning, the final day of the clock. She was at her machine when the summons came, and it was not the kind of summons a typist ever got. Mr. Vane wanted her upstairs. On the partner's floor. In the boardroom with the frosted glass she had walked past for 12 years and never once been let behind. The whole pool watched her stand up. 40 pairs of eyes. She smoothed her skirt and she took her mother's gray wool coat off the hook, though she did not know why she took the coat, except that some animal part of her already understood she would not be coming back to that desk. She went up, the frosted door opened, and she walked, for the first and last time, into the room where the men decided things. They were all there. Cornelius Halloran at the head of the long table, 63 and heavy and certain, the owner, the arrogance of 100 years of good names sitting on him like a good coat. Sterling Vane at his right hand, standing, waiting, a sheaf of wire slips in his fist. 3 other partners she typed for and had never spoken to, and Peter, at the far end, his face gone white, and still because he did not yet know what this was. Vane did not waste time. He laid a slip on the table and turned it so Cornelius could see it. "This went out over my standing order," Vane said. 2 days ago. It countermanded a hold I placed for the protection of this firm's clients. It was not authorized by me, it was typed by her. He said her the way you would say a thing you found on your shoe. A typist, Vane went on, sent a market instruction to your son and to our largest client, forging the authority of a senior partner. 11 accounts have already been unwound on the strength of it. If she is wrong, this firm has broken faith with those clients and opened itself to ruin. That alone should end her here this morning. Cornelius looked at the slip. Then he looked at Ruth, standing in her mother's coat with her hands folded, and there was no cruelty in his face, only the settled certainty of a man who had never once in his life imagined a woman from the pool could matter. "Is this your work?" "It is," Ruth said. She did not explain. She had learned long ago that explaining was what the guilty did. "Then you're dismissed," Cornelius said, almost gently, the way you'd put down a lame horse. "I'm sorry for it." "But we cannot have. There's more," Vane said. And there it was. Ruth felt it come. She had felt it building for 2 days like weather, and now the front broke over her, and Sterling Vane opened the vault she had spent 12 years sealing shut. "I had her looked into," he said. "Miss Vessey. It's an uncommon name. Uncommon enough that a man remembers it, if he was on the exchange in 1949. He turned to Cornelius, and his voice took on the false regret of a man enjoying himself very much. Her father was Thomas Vessey. You'll remember Thomas Vessey. Something moved in Cornelius Halloran's heavy face. He remembered. The broker this firm broke, Vane said, in the panic. Drummed off the floor. Ruined and finished and dead not long after. This firm did that. And his daughter, he pointed the slips at her like a blade, changed her ways so no one would know the name, and typed her way into the one place she could do the most harm, and waited. 12 years she waited. And then she forged my order to sabotage a position and take this house down from the inside. It isn't a market read, gentlemen. It's a revenge. A ruined man's daughter, planted in the pool, come to finish what the panic started. The room went silent. It was a good performance. It hung together. Every fact in it was true, and every conclusion in it was a lie. And that is the most dangerous kind of story there is. They all looked at her. Cornelius, stunned. The three partners, appalled. Peter, at the end of the table, half risen from his chair, his mouth open on a word he had not found yet. And Ruth Vessey, who had spent 12 years being invisible so that this exact moment could never come, discovered that now it had come she was not afraid of it at all. She let the silence sit. She had read enough tape to know that the pause before the number matters more than the number. Then she spoke, and she spoke quietly, to the whole table, so that they had to lean in to hear her, which is a thing her father had taught her too. My father was Thomas Vessey. Everything Mr. Vane has told you about him is true. This firm ruined him. He taught me to read a market before I could read a book. And when they took the floor away from him, he taught me anyway, at the kitchen table, with a length of old tape, because he said a market tells the truth to whoever bothers to read it honestly. And no firm on earth could take that away from a person, even if they took everything else. She looked at Sterling Vane. You're right that I hid my name. I hid it because I watched what this house does to a Vessey. I hid it because I wanted to work, and eat, and be left alone. That's the whole of my revenge, Mr. Vane, 12 years of typing your numbers and keeping my mouth shut. Her voice did not rise, it never rose. I broke that silence exactly once. 2 days ago. I read the tape breaking on Amberline, and I read 31 families on the wrong side of it, including a widow who gave you her husband's whole life on your word. And I decided I would rather lose this position than watch it happen and say nothing. So I sent the truth to the 2 men who could act on it. That is what I did. That is all I did. She reached into the seam of her glove, where the tape always went, and she drew out a folded strip and set it on the polished table, without a sound. My father taught me to read a market honestly, she said. It's the only thing this firm never managed to take. Then Ruth Vessey did what she had come up those stairs already knowing she would do. She did not wait to be dismissed twice. She turned, in her mother's gray coat, and she walked the length of that long room past every man in it, and she went out through the door she had never been allowed to open, and down the front stairs, and out the front entrance of Halloran and Vane, the great glass doors with the firm's name on them in gold. The doors that were for clients and partners and not for the pool. And she walked out of them into the cold Ohio morning with her head level and her name, finally, her own. She did not cry until she was 3 blocks gone, and even then only a little. She thought it was over. She thought she had lost, cleanly and completely, and the only thing she had kept was the truth, and the truth does not pay $41 a week. But the tape did not care what happened in that boardroom. The tape only tells the truth. And at 3 o'clock that afternoon, on the trading floor of Halloran Vane, the tape told it. The ticker machine in the corner, the one Peter Halloran had cleaned and oiled in secret, because he had watched her read it like scripture, that machine began to hammer. It hammered out Amberline electronics, and it hammered out the exact thing Ruth Vessey's lips had shaped 2 days before anyone believed her. The top. The turn. The seller underneath. The price breaking through, right on the number she had typed. It broke, and then it did not stop breaking. It went through the margin price like the floor of a rotten porch. Brokers who had mocked the typist stood white-faced around the tape, watching the number they had held to the clock fall past everything that could save it. Sterling Vane's position, the $2,400,000 of Ashford money he had margined into that stock and held over Ruth's silent alarm, it was gone by the closing bell. Every account he had kept to the clock was wiped clean. 31 families, he had said. The ones who trusted him. But not all of them were wiped. That was the thing the floor slowly understood as the wires came in. 11 accounts had been unwound in time. Then 12. Then more, the ones Peter Halloran had quietly walked out of the position over 2 days, on nothing but a typist's read. Those accounts came through whole. The widow Pearson came through whole. Her husband's insurance was safe because a woman she had never met had decided a stranger's ruin was worth more than her own job. The saved wires flooded onto the same floor Ruth Vessey had been thrown off of. And the men who had watched Sterling Vane call her a liar to her face stood in the wreck of his position and did the arithmetic themselves, and it came out the same for all of them. The firm was still standing that evening for one reason. A typist had outread every man in the building. Peter Halloran carried that into the boardroom the next morning, and this time it was not Ruth who stood accused. It was Vane. Cornelius sat at the head of the table again, but he was a different man than the day before. He had watched $2 million of his client's money burn on his senior partner's order. He had watched the firm's name saved by the very red that order had tried to bury. He was 63 and certain of very few things, that morning, and he had the sense to listen. Peter did not shout. He had his father's gift for quiet, only he used it for different things. He laid the wire slips on the table one at a time, in order, and he read the timestamps aloud. "Here is Miss Vessey's read, sent at 10:40 on Tuesday," he said. "Here is the top she called, confirmed by the tape at 11:15 the same morning. Here is Mr. Vane's standing order to hold, time-stamped the afternoon before. And here," he laid down the last of them, "are the 11 accounts I unwound on her read, every one of them whole this morning, and here is the ledger of the accounts held to the clock, every one of them gone." He looked up. "The firm is solvent this morning by a margin of exactly the accounts her call saved. Read the timestamps yourselves. A woman in the typing pool read this market 2 days ahead of the senior partner who ran it. She was right. He was wrong. And he tried to end her career to bury the difference." Sterling Vane rose to answer that. He was a man who had talked his way out of 100 rooms. "You'll let me finish," he began. "No," Cornelius Halloran said. "I don't believe I will." And that was the whole of Sterling Vane's fall. Not a shout, not a scene. One old man, cornered by his own survival, deciding at last that the girl read better than his son, and refusing to let the man who had lost the money speak another word in his own house. Vane stood there with his mouth working and nothing coming out of it, and the 3 other partners would not meet his eye. And he understood, finally, that the room had turned, and there was no talking a turned room back. He gathered his slips. He sat down. By the end of the month he would be gone from the firm entirely, put out for reckless margining, his name quietly removed from the letterhead, and no house on the street would take a man who had lost $2 million of a town's savings on a stock a typist had called against him. The arithmetic Walter Pym had once used to warn Ruth turned, in the end, on the man who deserved it. Cornelius did not apologize. Men like Cornelius do not. Quite. But when Peter finished, his father sat back in his chair and looked at the timestamps a long while, and then he said the thing that cost him more than any apology would have. "She reads better than you do, Peter. She reads better than anyone in this building," Peter said. "She always has. We just paid her not to say so." There was a woman waiting outside that boardroom too, though not the one you would think. Cordelia Ashwood had come up to the floor that morning on the understanding, arranged between the families, that certain things would be settled. She was 26 and a banker's daughter, and not a cruel woman, only a certain one. Certain of her right to the match the way you are certain of a chair you have always sat in. She watched Peter come out of that room. She saw his face. And Cordelia Ashwood, who was nobody's fool, did the arithmetic faster than any of them. She saw which way the young man's whole life had turned, and she did not make a scene about it either. She only drew her gloves back on, one finger at a time, and recalculated, cool and quick, a future that no longer had Peter Halloran in it. She was gone from Ashford before the first snow. She married a banker in Columbus within the year. She had never wanted the man, only the arrangement, and there are other arrangements. And Harold Dabney, the broker who had taken Ruth's consolidated rail call word for word and pocketed the bonus, who had built a small career on turns she called under her breath, Dabney was made to stand on that floor and watch the whole of it. Watch the tape prove her right. Watch the partners send for her. Watch the woman whose reeds he had stolen for years be named. Out loud. In front of everyone, the reason the doors were still open. Nobody punished Dabney. Nobody had to. He simply had to stand there and know what he had spent years pretending not to know, in front of every man who now knew it too. He never took another of her calls. He never got the chance. Peter did not send for Ruth with a messenger. He went himself. He found her where a woman with no position and no name goes at 11 in the morning on a weekday, a plain diner 3 blocks from the firm, a corner booth, a cup of coffee going cold in front of her. She was reading the paper. She was reading the financial page, of course, out of a habit she would never lose, and she saw Amberline down in the small type and she felt nothing about it at all. Which surprised her. The bell over the door rang. She looked up. And Peter Halloran was standing in the doorway of a working man's diner, in a suit that cost more than the whole room, holding his hat in both hands, and he looked, for the second time, tired and heavy, and about to do something that could not be taken back. He came to the booth. He did not sit. He stood there, turning the brim of his hat. "They know," he said. "All of it. The timestamps. Vane's out. My father knows you read that market 2 days before any of us." He swallowed. "I told them the firm is still standing because of you. I told them in front of everyone, and I told Cordelia's people that there wasn't going to be an arrangement. Because I was in love with a woman who could outread every man on the floor, and it would be a lie in front of God to marry anyone else." Ruth set down her paper. Her hands, she noticed, were not cold. For once in that whole long story, her hands were warm. "I didn't come to offer you your job back," Peter said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking you to come back to the pool." "No?" "No." And here he said the 4 words the whole thing had been walking toward from the first morning he saw her lips move ahead of the tape. He said them plainly, hat in hand, in a diner, the way the truest things get said. "Come read the floor. Not the pool. The floor." Ruth Vessey looked at this man, the owner's son, who had noticed her when noticing her cost him, and kept noticing her anyway. She thought about her father at the kitchen table with a length of old tape. She thought about 12 years of silence. She thought about a widow's insurance safe in the bank, because she had decided, once, to be seen. She picked up her coffee. It was the coffee she always took. Black, no sugar, and he knew that about her he had known it for months and never said. She took a sip of it, and she gave him her answer in the firm's own language, the only language the two of them had ever really needed, dry as a closing bell. "It topped an hour ago," she said, which is a trader's way of saying, "You're late. I already knew." And yes. Peter Halloran laughed, a real laugh, the first she had ever heard out of him, loud enough that the counterman looked over, and he sat down across from her in the plain booth. And that was the end of the invisible woman, and the beginning of the other one. The winter came in hard that year, the way it does in Ohio, and by the first real frost there was a new plate of glass on a small office on the trading floor of Halloran Vane. It was frosted, like all the others. It had a name cut into it in the same gold as the doors downstairs. The name said Vessey, not the name on the paper, the name underneath. Her father's name, back on the floor of an exchange, on the glass of the very house that had once drummed it off, put there, this time, because she had earned it in the one currency the market cannot fake. On the desk behind that glass sat a brass tape stylus, old, worn smooth at the grip by a man's thumb over many years. It had been Thomas Vessey's. For 12 years it had lived at the bottom of a drawer, taken out only in the dark. Now it stood upright in a cup on his daughter's desk, in the light, in plain view, where anyone walking past the glass could see it. Every morning the uncut tape lay across her keyboard, untorn, the way she had always left it out of habit, the way her father had. Only now it was not left there by her, and it was not left for no one. Peter left it. He came in before the floor opened, and he set the mourning ribbon across her keys, still whole, the way he had once done it disguised as carelessness. And beside it, now, he set 2 cups of coffee. One with sugar, one without. The firm went on. Sterling Vane cleaned out his desk on a gray afternoon in December, in silence, with no one to help him, and no one to say goodbye, and he carried his own box out through the front doors he had used 10,000 times, and nobody watched him go. Harold Dabney kept his desk and his mouth shut and read the tape himself for once, badly. Cordelia Ashwood's carriage passed the firm now and then on its way to the bank, and she never looked up at the glass. And Cornelius Halloran, 63 and set in 100 years of certainty, walked past his son's wife's office door most mornings on his way to his own. He never quite learned to say the thing out loud. He was too old and too proud for that, and some men die with the words still in them. But every morning, passing that frosted glass with Vessey cut into it, the old man slowed. Just a step, and he nodded once through the door, to the woman at the desk with the brass stylus and the uncut tape and the 2 cups of coffee. It was not an apology. It was as close as his whole world could come to one. And Ruth, who had learned young to read the small movement that means more than the number, took it for exactly what it was, and nodded back, and returned to the tape. Because that was the truth of the whole thing, the truth her father had put into her at a kitchen table, with a length of old ribbon, the truth that had cost her everything and then given it all back. A market, like a person, tells you the truth if you bother to read it honestly. It does not care about your name or your dress or which door they let you use. It does not care that you are a woman in a room full of men who were sure you could not do the one thing you did best. It only waits, patient as tape, for someone honest enough to read it. She had been that someone all along. It just took the world a little while to look. Wherever you're watching this from tonight, comment the name of your city below. I'd love to see how far Ruth's story has traveled.